Hit record and
Sounds like we're recording. So I will convene our meeting of the Burlington Planning Commission for Tuesday, January 10th, 2023. Welcome to everybody who's here. We're split up today a little bit. Some are live and in person in the conference room, and some of us are still hanging out remote. But thanks to everybody who's here. First item on the agenda is the agenda. Any changes to it? Don't see any.
no changes to the agenda.
Okay, then we'll have our agenda as presented. Our second item is a public forum. This is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to us on pretty much any item they would like to. And Charles will be recognizing you. Charles, do we have anybody for public forum?
We do not have anybody in person, but we do have some folks online. We'll start with Sharon Busher. If you would like to speak during the public forum, please use the raise hand icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen and we'll start a queue. Start with Sharon.
Hi, good evening, and I want to wish you all a happy new year. I hope it's a great 2023 for everybody, for the city, and for all of you individually. I am here tonight to listen to the mayor's presentation and Megan Tuttle's presentation regarding proposed amendments to inclusionary zoning. You know me, I got antsy because there was no real detail. So I reached out to a couple of people like Michael Monty and stuff to find out if they knew anything more and if there had been discussions with them. And I was told, at least from Michael, that he was aware and was supportive. I will wait to hear what is being shared. I value inclusionary zoning. I know when we had that committee that looked at IZ, and then I was a city councilor then, and I came as part of that report to all of you. Many of you are still the same faces that were there then. There were proposals that were tabled or set aside because we weren't ready to act on them. And a lot had to do with the size of the units, inclusionary zoning units. I don't recall if there were the number of bedrooms, but I know that some of what might be presented tonight was discussed at least a little bit in a prior time. So I am interested in that. And then I also just want to share with you that I'm looking forward to how you will roll out the missing middle. I was hoping that perhaps, you know, when you did those housing meetings, I don't remember all of the details, but after the housing summit, you had meetings for constituents that were like in the firehouse, etc. There's several of them. And it engaged the public, educated the public, and engaged them in a very, what I thought was a productive way. And I was hoping that maybe you'd think about that and see if that fit into a plan that you have for engaging all of us in this topic, because I think it's something that people want to know more about. Sometimes when people don't know a subject, they get concerns that are not valid. So I want to take the mystery out of it and get people thinking about it and really come up with how they feel, and if there's opportunity for modifications or just genuine support. I think that would be good. So anyways, thank you so much, and I look forward to the conversation tonight.
Thank you, Sharon. Charles, who else do we have?
We do not have any other folks who've raised their hand to speak. One more time, if you would like to speak, please use the raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen. We'll give you a few moments. All right, Andy, it looks like the others who are here are just here to listen for now, so we can move along.
All right, well, thank you. Thanks again, Sharon, for speaking during public forum. We will close that item now, move on to item 3, which is the chair's report. And I don't have anything to report here, so we'll move on to item 4, which is the director's report. Megan.
All right, thank you, Andy, and welcome and happy new year to all the commissioners. I also wanted to just recognize, especially for those of you that are on Zoom that may not have noticed, that Mayor Weinberger has joined us. He's here tonight to speak to the next item on your agenda, but also for the newer members, the mayor is an ex officio member of the Planning Commission as well. So as we start off 2023, a big focus of the work in our department this, I guess really this last week, has been just kind of refreshing where we are with our work plan for the fiscal year and taking stock of what progress we've been able to make on the amendments and other projects that we've talked a lot about with you over the last 6 months, and gearing up for how we will continue this work with you and as a team in this new year. So, one of those areas, as Sharon Busher had mentioned, was missing middle. And we absolutely are thinking and starting to put together some ideas for how we approach the next phase of that work, including some education and engagement work. We usually try to give you an update on zoning amendments that you have referred on to the City Council after your work. So if you didn't see this morning, in 7 days, the City Council took action last night to adopt the maximum parking limits and TDM amendments that you had seen a couple of times over the last year and provided feedback to the City Council on. After a lot of additional work, after it was referred from you, the council ultimately made some tweaks to how the TDM standards work today to offer some more flexibility for individuals to choose options from among a short list of TDM strategies that could be employed. And with that, felt comfortable moving forward with adoption of that ordinance. So we anticipate that will be reaching the mayor's desk for signature, and then we anticipate that going into effect in a couple of weeks. So related to that, we've talked about the TDM study a number of times, and happy to report that Charles has helped us set up interviews with 3 really well-known transportation planning firms that work in the TDM space. So we have started doing those interviews, and we expect that we'll have a consultant selected to support that work that we could have approved by the Board of Finance next month to begin that important work. So
Is that still private, or are you able to share the finalists?
good question. I think we could share who we're interviewing. Do you want to?
Yeah, so the 3 firms we're interviewing are BHB, and they're a national firm, but it would be their local office managing this with support from some of their other offices who have specific TDM experience. Fisher Associates, which is a group out of upstate New York, Buffalo, and Rochester, and Nelson Nygaard, which is also another national firm with TDM experience out of primarily their Boston office.
The other amendment there are 2 other amendments that have recently been referred by the Planning Commission. You may remember we talked about creating standards for public art and essentially an exemption from public art requiring a zoning permit. That ordinance was also adopted by the City Council last night. And then the other amendment that you just referred at your last meeting is about the Trinity campus zoning, and we're currently waiting for that to be referred to the City Council. A couple other quick updates. I think, as you all know, and thank you for your responsiveness when Charles reached out about your availability to schedule a few extra meetings as we start this month. Next week, we actually have 2 special meetings that we've invited you to. The first is our joint meeting with the DRB, DAB, and Conservation Board. I think, especially for the newer commissioners, this is actually a tradition that we used to bring all the boards together at the beginning of the year every year to just share updates about what each of us has been working on. And importantly, hear feedback from the boards that actually administer our ordinances on things that they're experiencing with the zoning, with the implementation of the zoning ordinance. So I think that we're looking forward to providing some updates on the short-term rental ordinance, which we've all worked on extensively for a number of years. the kind of body of work around the housing 10-point plan that we've been talking about a lot here at the Planning Commission. And then we'll also hear from the Conservation Board more about the work they're doing on nature-based climate solutions. So you are able to join that meeting either remotely or in person, though I think we may be offering food for anybody that attends in person, and that offers an opportunity for you to just get to meet some of the other board members as well. And then the last thing I'll share, the second joint meeting that we've invited you to next week is with the Council Ordinance Committee to talk about inclusionary zoning, which we'll get into here in a minute. So I think that's all I have, unless there are any questions.
Good. Thank you, Megan. Any questions for Megan? All right. And I can't see very well the people sitting in the conference room. So if anyone wants to speak out, just speak out. I may not be able to see if you raise your hand. So good. Thank you, Megan. And we'll close the director's report and move on to item 5, which is proposed CDO amendment ZA-23-02 inclusionary zoning. And I think Megan, you and the mayor are presenting on this one.
That's correct, Andy. I think I'm largely going to turn it over to the mayor to introduce this topic, and then I'll add anything else after he shares.
Okay. Mayor, welcome to our meeting. And sorry I didn't recognize you before when you came in. I just didn't see it was you.
No worries. Thank you for, it's great to be with you. It's been some time since I've exercised my ex officio status. There's been some change in the commission since I was last here. I would love to be here more often. It's challenging to do so, but I do, I do hope you always think of me as a resource if there are things that you're grappling with you think it'd be helpful for me to engage in one of these meetings. Please feel free to reach out. The reason I wanted to come tonight does have to do with the inclusionary zoning and specifically I'm glad to be here tonight because I'm not going to be able to join you next week when you have the special meeting. I'm going to be out of town. So I appreciate the chance to just sort of share my perspective on why this is really quite an important matter that I'm hoping you can bring real attention to. And you are, I appreciate that you already are by scheduling a special meeting. Hoping this is an item that will not have a huge amount of complexity, quite a bit of preparatory work has been done. And I think the issue from my perspective, maybe as we get into it and get more perspectives, this will prove to be inaccurate. But from my perspective, I think this is a fairly straightforward issue that I'm pretty hopeful there should be broad consensus about. I don't want to get deep in the weeds to it today, but let me, what I do want to do is convey why this is really quite important to what I think is a shared major initiative, certainly one that the Planning Commission has put effort into for years, of the administration and really the whole city has been focused on, which is the City Place project. If you haven't been by the site recently, I encourage you to do that. It's pretty exciting to go by there right now. I was there today. I'm often out and about in the middle of the day, try to walk by whenever I can. It is really a beehive of activity right now, as all good construction sites are. The concrete is being poured in for a stair tower, for foundation, for stormwater facilities. There's a lot of heavy equipment on the site, a lot of steel on the site. There's the steel to go vertical is already there. And in many ways, it is happening at long last after the years of us debating and working and having setbacks. It's moving forward. There is what all that can disguise is that there is some important unresolved aspects of the project that really hinge on the inclusionary zoning ordinance as it maps onto the project that they are planning there. They are very far down the road of permitting and securing partners. I just came from another event that had Michael Monty there from Champlain Housing Trust. as former councilor Sharon Busher mentioned, CHT is very supportive of a change because, you know, they are a key partner in this. They plan to build a major building there. It will be a more than 80 unit building. And it will be the biggest permanently affordable housing project built in Burlington in decades, one of the biggest ever. That is one of the 3 buildings permitted for the site. The reason we have a challenge is that the program, the preferred program, what the developers would like to build in the other 2 buildings, particularly probably the north building, has the vision for what will be a successful market rate project in the north building, which is a major building. It's more than a couple hundred units in itself, is what they believe the market opportunities are and the needs are very different in terms of bedroom mix than the what Champlain Housing Trust intends to build, wants to build to serve the permanently affordable housing market. What I'm hoping should make this a fairly straightforward conflict to resolve is there's no effort on the developers' part. The developers are going to more than exceed many elements of what our inclusionary zoning requires. They are planning that this project would be required under the existing inclusionary zoning ordinance would require 15% of the units to be permanently affordable. They are going to build more than 20% of the units will be permanently affordable. While they are contemplating a different bedroom mix, they are not attempting to play some kind of game with the project and reduce the square footage. There are more than 20% of the square footage in the planned project. Residential square footage will also be permanently affordable. What the challenge is that they, as the ordinance currently stands, will have a real challenge, probably cannot meet what is essentially a comparability test. That is, maybe Megan, maybe I don't have the language exactly right, but basically the ordinance requires the affordable units to be comparable to the market rate units, and that has been interpreted to mean, you know, basically the same bedroom mix. What we're hoping will be considered is whether there could be an alternate test created to meet the comparability, so that square footage really is our thought, which it would be another way that projects can meet the comparability test. I don't want to go too much further. Maybe I've even gotten us too much in the weeds by laying it out like that. But what I do want to just emphasize, I think what's important for you to hear is the reason I think there's some real urgency behind this. The project is moving forward right now, really entirely on the remarkable willingness of these 3 individuals, Scott Ireland, Dave Farrington, and Al Senecal, to take enormous, really personal risk to move the project forward. They have given the city personal guarantees worth tens of millions of dollars. I'm sure they have given other parties major guarantees. I think we're very fortunate that they are in a position to do that, and they're willing to do that. They do not have, and they've been public about this, they do not have the full financial agreements put together at this point for all 3 buildings. In fact, they've secured the financing to build this initial podium. They have the means to do that. They don't have the rest of the project lined up at this point. I have talked directly to the investors, some of the different investment groups that are considering partnering with them. And it is clear that there is, you know, such a mismatch between the programs of these 2 different projects that they cannot move forward with some of their investors, their preferred investors, if this regulatory disconnect is not addressed. And while the developers express full confidence to me in their ability to keep moving forward. I think it's important that we get this deal, given what we've all been through with this project, and it stops and starts over the last 5 years. I think it's critical the city do anything it can to be a good partner here. As long as we're doing so consistent with our values and our commitment to this IZ ordinance, which I'm really confident what we're going to present to you next week does that. I'm hoping we can move quickly to address this uncertainty, address this obstacle to them finalizing their agreements so that they can do that and they can move forward and this can all be locked in. I feel a particular urgency to do that, given the broader, as you know, kind of debt trends that are going on, the broader, real kind of historic volatility. Maybe volatility isn't quite the right word, but there's some big things happening in the capital markets these days. We're seeing interest rates going up, and while they have expressed full confidence that kind of no matter what happens with that, they're going to find a path forward. I think it's very much in the city's interest to see that project fully finalized and locked in so that we can be confident that it will be fully built out over the next couple of years here, and we can create these much needed 400 plus homes. We can create the new retail space. We can get these streets back. I will sleep much better when they can move forward and get that locked in. And I think we have this collective work to do before they can do that. I hope that, I'm going to go on too long. I hope that makes sense. Happy to answer any questions about it. Charles has been working hard on this as well as Megan. And so, I think probably a lot of the detailed questions should wait for next week, but if there anything that, if you have questions for me about what I'm trying to articulate here, happy to answer them.
Thank you, Mayor. Are there any questions for the mayor from the commissioner?
Maybe for Megan, just for on background, having not been here for the discussion or discussions. That's what you were doing, right? Discussions. Oh my goodness. For the discussions and negotiations, is the IZ the whole, all three buildings? So in other words, is the CHT project part of the IZ, or does each building stand?
The plan for the project is they've gotten a permit, they permitted the whole project at once. And so to build the 400, basically take the total number of units being built on the project and apply the 15% or 20% against that total. And that, 15% creates the IZ requirement. And all of that is being handled for the entire block in this one of the three buildings in the CHT building.
Okay, got it.
And I think that we can get into this more next week, but I think that model, and part of the reason why the concerns that are being brought forward for your consideration next week are important, is that we're seeing that kind of model becoming more and more a success for larger scale projects in the city. So, where a lot of the development that we would see previously was, a single building, maybe with dozens or 100 units. Now we're seeing master plan projects that are implemented in phases over time, and the willingness and ability of an organization like CHT to come on as a partner to help provide the inclusionary requirement for the whole project, or maybe a substantial part of the project as one of the phases of a project. So I think this will help not just for the importance of the City Place project that the mayor mentioned, but I think we'll also have some applicability for future projects as well.
Anyone else?
Andy, I just should say that I represent City Place Partners and at least one other developer that will be directly impacted by this.
Okay, thanks for letting us know. Anyone else?
Go ahead.
My firm is also doing the landscape.
Oh, okay.
That has a bearing here.
Okay, great.
I am wondering what the exact nature of the change would be to the ordinance. Is it directly related to the comparability test that you mentioned, or is there another specific change that this would involve the ordinance.
Yeah. Do you want to say?
Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I think, so we'll introduce the amendments to you as part of the
Okay.
agenda packet for your meeting next week. But it is limited specifically to 2 sections of the ordinance that have to do with the, I say parity, really. So about bedroom mix and the ratio of the size of the IZ to the market rate units.
The,
Alex?
Hi, Mayor Weinberger, I appreciate you coming and talking to us and explaining this to us. And so I sort of have a question for Megan and Andy and Mayor Weinberger, like, you know, how much detail can we get into now, or is we're going to talk about this next week? Like, what is the disconnect between the market rate units and the affordable units? And, you know, I mean, this all sounds pretty logical to me, like, you know, rather than build, 10 4-bedroom units, we're going to build 20 2-bedroom units, or, speaking very generally.
yeah, I think we'll be more prepared. I think the team will be prepared next week to offer some additional details, but you basically put your finger on it. The market rate project is interested in building 3 and even 4-bedroom units, or one of the potential routes that they want to go, whereas the CHT reports that the market that, the deeply affordable, and CHT, another important point that CHT has articulated and communicated to the city council as the development agreement between us and City Place was being approved a couple months ago at the city council. CHT communicated that their intent on the site is not just to meet the affordability requirements in the IZ ordinance, that a substantial percentage of the units are going to be deeply affordable. A quarter of them are going to serve formerly homeless households at deep levels of affordability. They are experts in building that kind of housing, making it operationally successful, and they tend to, and in this case, want to build much more 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom units. So that's the disconnect. I don't think the current ordinance gives us a good way of, the current ordinance essentially assumes that the affordable market and the market rate markets will be comparable or have parity.
The
And
same.
I think what the reality is that there are some important differences that that we don't currently have a way of recognizing. I appreciate Sharon's reference at the beginning to this committee effort that we had several years ago that really, I think, for the first time since the ordinance was created 25 years ago, approximately now, really took seriously the possibility that the details of the ordinance could have unintended consequences and could actually get in the way of projects happening, could work against, frankly, the affordability goals that we have. And that committee did a lot of work to try to address some of those, and we made some very substantive, significant changes out of that. As Sharon mentioned, it was recognized at the time that that there was a high likelihood that further work would be needed to further refine and update the ordinance. And I think we have come to another one of these here, and I see nothing. And this is why we have a lot of people involved in the process, and maybe someone will flesh out something out different. But I think the way we are proposing it there is consistent with that past reform effort. It's going to make the ordinance work better. It's going to ensure that the important goals of the IZ ordinance are still met. I don't think there's any ways to characterize this as watering down or weakening the ordinance. It's simply providing some flexibility for the goals of the ordinance to be met in a couple of ways. What Charles and Megan have worked on is tightly focused. There was some question I will share, I guess, as we started this, should we try to address some of the other issues that have come up over the years, wish within the inclusionary zoning ordinance, have this, if we're gonna look at it again, have a broader impact. And I thought it's unwise to do that because of the urgency of the situation. And if we expand the scope of this, I think it becomes a much more, potentially becomes a much more complicated, time consuming effort. And I think time is a real issue right here.
And the only thing I'll add to what the mayor shared is, I think many of the commissioners here, maybe about half of you have joined the commission since that joint IZ work was completed. I know all of the council ordinance committee members are new since that work was completed. But I'll share, and I'll mention this again next week, that specifically this issue of parity was one issue that was discussed all the way up to the last minute of all of the kind of full suite of changes that we made to the IZ ordinance. This was one that there was continuing debate on. And I think, as the mayor said, ultimately, we decided to move forward with a direction, knowing that we might need to revisit it in the future. So in a lot of ways, it's not surprising to hear this issue coming up again.
Thank you. Anyone else want to weigh in or ask any questions now? And then, again, this will be coming back to us next week when we meet with the City Council Ordinance Committee. Anyone else? All right, well, then we'll close this. Thank you, Mayor, for joining us. And you're always welcome, so hope we see you again soon at our meeting. And you're also
Great,
welcome to stay tonight.
Thank you. I need to get home and help get my 9-year-old to bed. So I don't think I'm gonna stay, although, I mean, if you know, and I don't want to screw up your agenda by but I truly would be happy to come back. I'm very grateful for the work you do here. And I know you have Megan and I just had one of our regular check-in meetings earlier today, and it was exciting to see the work plan that she has laid out for the department for the year ahead. And I know a great deal of that work involves engagement with you and support for you. So I'm excited about the work that lies ahead, and I'd be happy to come back and talk about any of it anytime. And I'll look for opportunities to do that. Thank you, Andy.
All right, thank you, Mayor. So we'll close that item and move on to item 6, which is proposed CDO amendment ZA-23-01 South End Innovation District. This is a continuation of our discussion. We had our public hearing on the proposed zoning change that carried over through 2 different dates. We closed the public hearing at our last meeting, and we were on to our commission discussion and ran out of time, so we're picking up where we left off today. So I think this is with you, Charles.
It is. Sorry, we're just figuring out some tech here. Okay. So as you mentioned, Andy, the hearing was closed on the 20th. So we're here to present really about a couple things, 2 sort of main sort of categories. The first is to respond to the range of public comments and also some of the discussion that you all have had about various issues. And the second is a set of revisions to the draft amendment that you had and that was considered in the hearing. Those revisions, believe it or not, have been sort of in the document for almost a couple months now. We've just, not been able to discuss them with you, present them to you. We had our one meeting in November, and the meeting in December, and we didn't have time. The discussion didn't allow for it. So despite appearances, those revisions are things that we've been thinking about for quite some time, for months, in fact, and they mostly have their genesis in discussions with you all, but also discussions with stakeholders and some members of the public. And so with that, we'll move ahead. So again, the public comment review includes building height, and specifically as it impacts any lake views, building floor plate standards, the land use table, the impact to the existing sort of light manufacturing and manufacturing district that is the ELM, and the potential for the district to impact that the sort of land that is preserved for light manufacturing. Lake water quality and how the district could impact that. The innovation district sort of place within the larger South End, specifically how the Plan BTB South End envisioned this part of the city changing and growing over the years. And the last is a flexible development framework. And the proposed revisions that are in the draft that are in your packet include what I would say is a fairly modest increase to the maximum setback, and a one-time exemption to parking structure floor plates, the way we deal with street hierarchies and blocks, ingress and egress of parking structures, a very technical change to the land use table, and a new allowance for planned unit developments to be possible in the South End Innovation District. And we also define floor plate. So with respect to building height and lake views, we have heard quite a bit of comment from members of the public, both for and against in the last few meetings. And we also discussed this at our public events in the summertime. Those summertime events demonstrated what I would say is fairly broad support for a mix of building heights up to 8 stories. Subsequently, in these planning commission meetings, we've heard sort of more from the other side. So definitely want to continue and facilitate that discussion. But a couple of things I do want to note, and you'll see this in the following slides, is that generally the city's policy is to the extent practicable, protect views of the lake and the Adirondacks from public open spaces and primary east-west streets. Also, as you'll see, generally what is obstructing views in these upland neighborhoods are existing trees and homes and other buildings. And future development, therefore, would largely be screened by these trees, even in Callahan Park, as I hope you'll see. So these are just 2 excerpts from the ordinance today. They deal with site review standards and architectural review standards, and they basically say the same thing, that important views, like I said, should be protected from public open spaces and east-west streets, but in no way should these protections be extended to exclusively private property. So that is the ordinance language on the books today. With that, so we've cut 3 sections moving from south to north. So there's a red line here in this aerial image on the bottom right of your screen, cutting through the property at 125 Lakeside, crossing Pine Street and going all the way up essentially to the Country Club or Rota Place. So the buildings in purple in the section are approximately 85 feet, and that red line, dash line extending, you can see it goes up to Shelburne Road. But again, if I'm standing on Cherry Lane or Bittersweet Lane, looking out, primarily what is blocking my view is trees and homes. But again, there are some east-west streets, and the code does instruct developers to the extent practical avoid blocking those views from those places. So this is from Callahan Park, and you can see in the section, the sort of middle portion shaded in green is the park. 85 stories would be permitted directly west of the park, behind the existing Department of Public Works building and in front of the Innovation Center building. And I'm going to share some photos that we took over the past weeks in Callahan Park. If you can see, there's a yellow dashed line that is essentially matching the height of the Innovation Center. So the Innovation Center today is about 4 stories, but 65 feet, as these old mill buildings tend to be. They have tall, high floors, about 15 feet. You can see the outline of the Innovation Center in white there in the middle of your screen, and then in red is an approximation of what an additional 20 feet would be on top of the 65 foot height of the Innovation Center itself. And so any buildings that are up to 8 stories or 85 feet would reach approximately that red line. This isn't exactly scientific, but it is an approximation. So you can see that what is blocking the views, again, primarily the trees, and obviously note that this is taken in the winter time. So in the spring, summer, and fall, when leaves are on these trees, the views are obstructed even more by those existing trees. And so the next series of slides is essentially going to replicate this from different vantage points. So moving west through the park, sort of down the hill as you approach the playground, even more so are your views obstructed by the existing sort of built and natural fabric. And again, moving down the hill, just above right field in the baseball field, you can see the red line, the outline of the Innovation Center. And this is all just to say that 8-story buildings, while they could have some impact from the park, again, it's primarily those trees. So moving north, similar section, the slope is a little bit steeper as you go north. So Willard Street is essentially the 65 foot line. And remember, as you go north in the Innovation District, only 6-story buildings are proposed to be permitted. So this is the height map that is in the amendment, and that is still, it's not changed in that revised amendment. And so I think the key takeaway here is that, the full suite of bulk and height standards that we have proposed, in our opinion, will do much to preserve views, will do much to break up building facades and to prevent sort of long expanses of unbroken street wall up to 85 feet. And those include max height, the floor area ratio that we've set at 2.25 plus the 0.25 bonus for inclusionary zoning. The maximum floor plate of 15,000 square feet, tapered down to 10,000 square feet at floors 7 and 8. The lot coverage standards of 80% or 90% if significant green stormwater infrastructure is implemented, and block perimeter. All together, these sort of mean that buildings will necessarily be broken up, that there will be spaces for view corridors to remain. This also inherently means that on the ground, there will be spaces for folks to move through buildings and likely have views through the water from some of these sites themselves. So that's the discussion about height. I'm happy to run through this presentation, or if you want to stop me and talk about height, we can do that now. Otherwise, I'll keep rolling.
And just for those of you on Zoom, in order for us to also see the screen here, we had to minimize your videos. So as Andy said before, if you want to weigh in, please feel free to just jump in. Otherwise, we may not see you.
Anyone have any questions or comments on this? I know from the public comments that we heard and what I've heard from folks is height was one of the biggest issues that was in front of us.
Yeah, so I guess one thing I would add here, Andy, is that, given the ordinance language, seeking to preserve to the extent practicable views from public open space, I think the red area north of Lakeside Avenue is one where you could pay particular attention. At 85 feet, some of those views from the park could be impacted if you consider the trees and the park themselves not to be already obstructing that view.
I'll make a comment. I spent a lot of time in Callahan Park and just have thought a lot about this issue. And to me, that's the only view shed that really matters in this discussion. And in the summer, a lot of our discussion has been after the tree canopy or after the leaves fell down. in the summer from where you are, kind of just by where the ice rink is in the winter time, you really, where you can see is directly over the Innovation Center. The leaves sort of block the rest of the views. So, you know, there's, I suppose, the possibility you could build on top of the Innovation Center at 65 feet. But for the most part, that's kind of your view corridor in the summertime. And I think there's some public comment, you know, after we had some of the public comments, people went to the park, and yes, you can see more right now. But there obviously isn't as much use in the winter time as there is in the summertime. So, and then I think my other feeling on this is that, like, we kind of just have to make some tough choices as a city about where we have density, and where we produce more units. And it can't be perfect, but this is a decent compromise.
Thanks. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'll echo what Michael just said about having to make tough choices. I think, you know, given the permeability that you just illustrated for us, Charles, of these different dimensional standards, I think it'll be likely that any 8-story building or collection of 8-story buildings in the area won't function as a wall blocking views from Callahan Park or other you know, public spaces like, you know, streets and sidewalks towards the lake. And instead there will be these pockets of view sheds there. But I think, you know, the tough choice between the beauty of that view and the value from the view from the park is a bit outweighed by the need to grow smartly and to make sure that by the units there.
Thanks for that comment. Anyone else? All right, great. Charles, thanks. I think you could continue.
Sure. So the next issue is building floor plate standards. So remember that the standard as proposed is 15,000 square feet for floors 1 through 6. And any floors 7 and 8 would be limited to 10,000 square feet, with the caveat being that if a building is built with matte timber, i.e. cross-laminated timber, or is built to Passive House, LEED, or a number of other green building standards, that those floors 7 and 8 could go up to 15,000 square feet. So these next slides are examples of buildings from Burlington and elsewhere that have floor plates, you know, at 15,000 square feet or below, to illustrate that we think this is a reasonable standard that is marketable. So this is one Lakeview in Burlington. I'm sure you're all familiar with this building, coming in at 13,570 square feet. As a typo. And so just moving along here. Champlain College Miller Center, which is in the Innovation District itself, recently built sort of academic office space, 12,700 square feet floor plate. This is a recent development in Boston, Distillery North. It is just this portion, the sort of boulder, sort of brick orange color. This one is 10,900 square feet. This one actually does have parking below grade as well. And Gleis 21 is a project from Vienna. This actually won this year's or 2022's award, UN's Building of the Year award for residential development. It is 12,500 square feet. You can see, I think it has a 6th floor, sort of, it's like penthouse, but it's otherwise sort of 5-floor building. All of that is to say, we stand by the proposal as is, but happy to have any discussion about floor plate.
Thank you. Anyone want to weigh in on this one or comment on this floor plate issue? Don't see anyone, but If you want to speak, just chime in. All right, Charles, I think we're good with that, at least for this part of the discussion.
All right. Floor area ratio is something that you all discussed, and a few of you actually followed up about floor area ratio. We've heard some comments from others as well. Specifically asking the question, is 2.5 too low? So remember, the base allowable FAR is 2.25. Any residential development would include inclusionary zoning, which would allow a 0.25 bonus on top of that to get to 2.5 FAR. So these are just some very basic, sort of modeling approaches to a couple of these sites. There's many ways that these sites could be developed. This is not a depiction of any development scenario, nor is it an endorsement of this approach. It is all just to illustrate that at an FAR of even 2.25, one could conceivably see upwards of 500 residential units and a very large, frankly, probably unrealistically large amount of non-residential space. So you could probably calibrate the non-residential space down and add some of that back into the residential unit sort of column and get more than 500 units. And this is again with 500 plus parking spaces. So similarly for another site up on Pine Street, at an FAR of just below 2 on this site, you could get close to 300 units with significant amounts of parking. And so again, we do feel like 2.5 FAR is adequate. Given the city's housing goal over the next years and likely decades, the South End Innovation District could accommodate much of that growth, but it shouldn't accommodate all of the growth. And at 2.5 FAR, it could. But again, that's just to say that 2.5 FAR across the district would produce sort of likely more houses than are in demand now. So this is really setting the city up to have space to grow in the South End, along with the other range of housing initiatives that are in place, including missing middle and some of the other areas that are, I would say, prime for growth.
And I think before we move on from this topic, unless there are any questions about it, I think just to underscore, I think what Charles is saying is that we're not recommending any changes to this. I think it's a pretty significant allowable intensity of development as is, especially when we consider how large these sites are. But just for the members of the public who are on here, I think it's important to just pause and reiterate here that what Charles said about these examples just being illustrative in nature to help test out whether the standards that we have are kind of in the right range. This is not suggesting that we will see, 100, 300 or 500 housing units on every single parcel in this district. I think that's just important to say.
Thank you, Megan.
Question on this analysis, it's been a while since we looked at this. In terms of, does this still hold if we have, if the streets are dedicated, to the city and that kind of thing? Does all this still hold?
Yes, so in this scenario, they've got this 6+ acre site and they're probably paving a couple new streets in it at least, so those are taken out of that. So the FAR is based on the site area that is exclusive of any of that right of way. I should say that's a great question. Very likely that any new streets created on these larger lots would be dedicated as public right of way. So those would be excluded from the sort of base site area.
Okay.
All right, Lake Champlain water quality really quickly. So the Champlain Parkway itself is implementing green stormwater infrastructure that is meant to absorb much of the stormwater falling on the parkway and particularly some adjacent sites. So that's already happening. In addition, if you can see the red lines are quite faint, but to the right on this aerial image, DPW has gone in and implemented a sort of cleaning out and restructuring of the forebay here, just behind DPW's building that leads into the Pine Street barge canal, which is meant to increase the stormwater capacity of that nearby system. Obviously, many of these sites in the district today are surface parking lots that are 100% impermeable, and so any development is likely an improvement upon current sort of stormwater situations. Remember that there's also a lot coverage bonus if all of the sites open area or impervious area is green stormwater infrastructure, which is meant to infiltrate water onto sites themselves, and to the extent possible, keep it out of the city's stormwater management sort of hard infrastructure, which would reduce localized flooding likely, and thereby also help clean the water and help keep the lake, the Pine Barge Canal and Inglesby Brook clean as well. Also should say that the Chapter 26 stormwater standards are generally more stringent than state standards, and so any development would have to adhere to those at minimum.
And this is a section of city ordinance that applies outside of the zoning to any development over a certain size. There's nothing specific that we need to do in the zoning ordinance to make that applicable here.
I'll move along, so just interrupt me if you'd like. So we had a question about, what about the rest of the South End? Why is the South End Innovation District taking all of our attention? And yes, the plan does call for quite a bit more sort of implementation of infrastructure and planning objectives in the South End. Remember, last year, actually almost a year and a half ago now, I guess, in October of 2021, the former planning director and Megan gave a presentation about a potential zoning strategy to strengthen the remainder of the Enterprise Light Manufacturing District. We have seen recently some news about Rhino Foods expanding here in South Burlington. That in itself is implementing one of the objectives of Plan BTB South End for the city to continue to encourage sort of growth of the manufacturing sector in this part of the district. There's work being done on the Pine Barge Canal, as our colleagues presented to the city council in early December, just an update on the Barge Canal and some related wastewater and stormwater infrastructure. So it's clear that there is additional work being done outside of the South End Innovation District. I would also say that the upcoming neighborhood code work is going to look at the city's residential zoning, and that will likely apply to many of the residential neighborhoods upland. So we had a question about flexible development framework. I'm not going to talk about each of these, but just want to say that we do feel like over the course of the last few months, the approach has evolved with respect to building height, parking structures, which I'll talk about in just a moment, block perimeter, the residential use location or where residences can be permitted, and hotels. All right, so we are expecting some discussion about this part. So remember that the Innovation District proposes a land use table that has two primary columns, the first of which is a permitted use and the second of which is a secondary permitted use. And those permitted uses are really at the core of what Plan BTB South End called for in the South End Innovation District. Obviously, housing has been added to that. But some of the things that are in that primary use category include things like art spaces, some light manufacturing, sort of maker space type spaces. Also uses that we sort of consider to be of great benefit to the community or of great need to the community, including childcare, libraries, that sort of thing. And the secondary uses are those uses that we feel are very important and perhaps inherent to a successful district, but that are not at the core of what the innovation district is envisioned as. And so the mechanism by which we propose to facilitate the development of those secondary uses is to say that the secondary uses can be implemented basically on a one-for-one basis with the primary uses. So the examples here, example project A on the right. So the primary use, let's say a developer comes in and they're really itching to put a 10,000 square foot restaurant in their development. So one way for them to be able to do that is to develop a 5,000 square foot artist studio somewhere on their site and a 5,000 square foot community garden totaling 10,000. So 10,000 to 10,000. Example project B, they're using a 40,000 square foot research lab, which is in that primary category, to facilitate the development of these other secondary uses that you see on the bottom. Notice if you've got the table in front of you, or if not, we can open it up and look at it later, but public park and community garden are in there. There are some uses that, you know, like childcare are of great need to the community, and happy to take any questions about the land use approach as we've got it today.
Just really quickly, one thing I would add is that the way this is structured is that the one-to-one that Charles was talking about applies across a lot, not within every single building.
That's right. Thank you.
So that brought up a question I had. So how will we memorialize those plots? Will that be like a map that's included with the ordinance? Because presumably over time,
Lots will change.
yeah, right, like ownership will change, it'll be parcelized, et cetera.
So I don't know if you want to speak to this. One thought that I have off the top of my head, as we've talked through this, is just, especially because we're talking about sites today that are really large and have the potential to be subdivided. There are some sections of this proposed ordinance where we're very explicit that we're saying lots as of today's date, essentially. This is not one of those places. So if any of these large parcels were to be subdivided, these standards would apply to any of those sublots. If in the case of a planned unit development, which we haven't talked about yet, if a kind of conceptual level plan was approved and then it was subdivided, I think there could be some more flexibility for how this gets interpreted across those lots.
So this is not something that I focused on initially because we were focused on many of the form related discussions, but in talking to a couple of people with development experience, and also just being, I suppose the, I don't know what the right term is, being married to a dentist. Some of these things caught my mind, particularly with like some of the outreach we had. So, you know, just as a for instance, we're prioritizing, say, a print shop over a dental clinic. If anyone has moved to town, I know some of you had and tried to get a physician, or a dentist is actually a little easier. That's a very difficult thing. So, and then obviously some of the public comment was around sort of, you know, my impression of that was, and I may be misremembering, but it was like a neighborhood oriented sort of activity. Well, at the same time, we had this overarching desire, it seems like as a city, as an innovation center, to have sort of a job center. So I knew that we're trying to thread the needle between a lot of these things, but in the way this is set up, you know, like office is good because that's job oriented, but that's not neighborhood facing. Whereas a cafe is, and I think, you know, I reached out to Charles, and the example I gave was that you would have to have, if you had it's one thing if you have a non-residential development, this is quite easy in a way. But if you have a multifamily development and you have limited non-residential space, it would be weird to have a lot of multifamily development without a cafe, but yet we're like, we have narrow criteria under which you could accommodate that multifamily with a cafe. And so I'm not exactly sure what the right answer is, but it just strikes me that we're setting ourselves in kind of a weird geometry, like math problem here that might be challenging. The other thing is, and you all would know better than me where this stands, is that there's, as I understand, it's been to DRB, a spa and a bowling alley use that's within the zoning overlay that would be non-conforming after we pass this. So it seems to me like this is worthy of thinking through a little bit. Unfortunately, I don't exactly have the answer because I think that, I think there's some objectives trying to be met here and just throwing it all away and saying, you can sort of do any non-residential use is maybe not appropriate, but if there's a way we can like generalize or try to be more explicit about what we're trying to do. I just think we're setting ourselves up for some weird conversations down the line.
Yeah, I think I'm happy to respond to that, and then if there are any further questions or thoughts from other commissioners, I think you really hit the nail on the head when you said we're trying to thread the needle. In some cases, some of these uses that tend to be more neighborhood serving are not even necessarily uses that may be allowed in the district today as it is. And so we are trying to open up the door in modest ways to enabling some of those uses to appear in the district if and as people that are living there might demand them. But I think you said it really well. Our concern is also that in order for this to be consistent with Plan BTD, while we do feel that it's really important for us to see and to potentially have large numbers of new homes in this district, it would not necessarily be the intent of Plan BTD to see a primarily residential district with just restaurants and cafes supporting that district, or those new homes. So the intent here is really to try to help us in the best ways that we can think of, facilitate some mixed use that does help us achieve both of those purposes. And the question has come up about incentives, and while it's not explicitly structured as such, I think that in some ways the two columns here could be read as a form of incentive, where if you provide a daycare or if you're providing art space, then you can also provide a cafe or one of the other uses that are in that secondary column. It's just a much more explicit route for articulating incentives as we typically think about them. So I mean, if there are other suggestions about how to finally thread that needle, happy to hear them. But as some of the other commissioners know, this was a big concern that we had too in thinking about how we implement or facilitate change in other parts of the enterprise district, where Plan BTD prioritized the preservation of manufacturing, for example. And we wanted to allow some flexibility for the market to help us preserve that space or make it viable, but we didn't want to give it completely over to uses that were not necessarily envisioned by the plan.
So, well, I don't know if other commissioners had comments.
If I could just make a comment, and maybe Andy could weigh in a little. I think the history in Burlington trying to prescribe specific uses in certain ways has been a failure. And we are at a really tender point in the marketplace as far as construction of anything is concerned. Construction costs have gone up from maybe $225,000 a square foot to like $350 or $400. So you're seeing lots of projects paused. So if we try to prescribe certain things like 5,000 square feet inside that it can't be used or can't be rented at reasonable market rates, can mean the project doesn't pencil out and it never gets built, and those housing units don't get built and the remainder don't. And we'll never even know that it never happened. So it would be my strong suggestion not to micromanage the market like this. I think it's a huge mistake. I think it sounds good maybe in the lab, but this is a case where the government imposition of something will result in unintended consequences.
Yeah, I'll just follow up on that for a second, which is when we were doing the whole form-based code, and I know this isn't that, but in the form-based code, we really put the uses as a secondary issue. What we were really concerned about was how it interacted with the street, how the project looked, how it was built, and thought that there should be a wide range of flexibility over what you do on the inside. And I think a way that might carry over into this discussion is what we want to make sure is that whatever goes on inside, it's done in a way that there's flexibility to change it over time, because one of the things that happens a lot is somebody builds it to be in with one use inside, and then that lasts for a little bit, and then someone else, that whatever it is goes away, and then something else comes in. So we want to make sure that things are designed and built and used in ways that really allows the flexibility for it to change over time, that we don't force something to be the inside to be a certain way. So I mean, for me, again, I guess my experience dealing with the form-based code is what goes on the outside in some ways is far more important than how we control what goes on inside. Controlling the outside, sure, because we wanted to work with the streetscape. We want it to be friendly to the people around it, but what goes on inside, I personally, I've grown less concerned about that.
Yeah, if I could just kind of quickly respond to that, I think to Andy's point, this is an issue that we talked about in earlier discussions about this amendment, and something that we thought and talked a lot about internally before we even brought this forward to the Planning Commission for discussion is just like that sort of fundamental approach. Are we taking a more traditional approach to how the various provisions of this ordinance come together? Are we focused on uses, or are we going to take more of a form approach? And I think we've shared before that we made the decision to keep this more focused on uses just because of the sensitivity of this part of the city. And in order to successfully implement zoning that reflects the community's priorities through NBTV, it necessitates a focus on uses in a way that the form code downtown, for example, does not. So definitely not saying that doesn't mean that there's not room for flexibility in how we think about what uses can and should be permitted in this district, but I think that's fundamentally why we didn't bring you more of a form approach that doesn't care much at all about uses in this area.
So, one approach we could take is the go slow on approach, do it where it's a little bit more prescribed on the uses to address the concerns, Megan, that you're raising, or I'll call it the policies or priorities that you're raising, and just keep an eye on it and see if it's overly restrictive or not. One of the things I think we've learned in zoning is it's easier to open up things than to shut them down. And so maybe start with the more limited uses of, and more focused uses the way you're describing it. But again, just be aware of that and be flexible if we need to start opening that up based on experience.
I don't want to dominate the conversation because I see that Alex and Eves have both raised their hand too. Andy, if you want to go to
Okay.
them first.
Okay, I can't see anybody else, so.
I think
just
this is
chime in.
interesting, actually, on the form versus restrictive uses. I mean, this is kind of important, no?
Yes, it is. But go ahead if you have.
Whatever I
comments.
have to say is less important.
No,
Well,
Nope.
I have a general comment about this whole process, and so why don't you let Eves go first,
okay,
if he's not muted?
Eves,
I was just going to tag on to what Bruce had said, that I'm really squeamish about us prescribing uses. I think, as Bruce has said, and no offense meant, but it's been a resounding failure, and you absolutely have to give the market and, frankly, the community the ability to program what they want into spaces. you can't prescribe it. So I'm extraordinarily squeamish about that as well. Just wanted to make that clear.
Thanks. Alex?
Can I
And I
ask,
know Michael had a comment too. I don't know if Alex, if you were gonna change topics, I don't know if Michael's was still on this topic.
yeah, let's stay on topic.
Oh, sure. So one day I'm gonna open a business called Elegant Solutions, because that's always what
We need,
I like to try and find. There's lots of elegant flooring companies, but I'm gonna have Elegant Solutions. But so I just wonder, like, and yeah, I don't want to like sideswipe you guys with this so late in the process, and you have been very transparent and straightforward about sort of like, do we take a form approach? Do we, you know, there's a lot of sensitivity here, so we need to speak about uses. But I would think of the example we just discussed with the City Place development, Champlain Housing, you know, building the affordable component of the IZ in one spot, and then, you know, the rest of the two other buildings being market rate. And so I think it's okay to have this, so we at least have like site plan flexibility. So if it stays, if these requirements stay at the lot level, that we define those, if we've already defined those otherwise, then maybe that's a way, because like, if you have, and let's say for some reason, I think this is unexpected in the medium term, but we get an office building. Maybe it's an owner occupied building for some reason. Well, those office workers would also want a cafe, right? And so, you know, does that then satisfy a lot of the requirement for some of these other uses to be unlocked? So I think like, if we're gonna stick to it, I think I have similar reservations, but if we're going to do this, it needs to be in such a way that there is maximum flexibility at a site plan level to sort of manage this. So, you know, I don't know if the existing lot lines are the right sort of, you know, geography, but as a minimum, I think we want to at least do that. So that'd be my suggestion. We want to keep this and move forward, at a minimum, do that. But even perhaps be more expansive. But I know we want to stick away from density bonuses. That was my other idea, but I know that's not something you want to do.
yeah, I think what, for those of you, maybe if you couldn't hear Michael, or just to put it another way. I think, and again, we haven't gotten to this yet, but we do want to propose that somebody could take advantage of our planned unit development process in this district, which allows for essentially the zoning standards to apply across multiple lots rather than, or for kind of a higher level plan to be prepared for multiple lots. And then permit each individual project as sort of a phasing approach. So I hear what you're saying, that, you know, maybe there's a mechanism that at that PUD level, we're looking at, you know, across multiple lots, we're looking at achieving this sort of mix. But then an individual site may be able to be programmed, for example, only with uses from the secondary list, rather because primary uses have been achieved somewhere else on the site. Is that what you're suggesting?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. I mean, I think that could be an interesting approach for us to explore. I think we'd have to think through the mechanics of how we would write that, if that's something that the commission is open to exploring. It's similar to some research we did early on, basically district performance zoning kind of standards, which is also another technical approach to zoning that we haven't really implemented here in Burlington. But we could look into that. And then I did want to respond to the density bonus approach too, and just say, like, we have generally, kind of like other commissioners have commented about how we've tried to learn lessons from the past. We've tried to move away from density bonuses as a tool because we have found, in general, we're just not able to offer a meaningful incentive to actually see the result of that investment, or to see the result of that policy intent. Things like height or density bonuses sometimes are not in line with what the reality is that we would actually need to offer in order to incentivize someone to do something. So as we've implemented form code and as we've implemented other major changes to our zoning ordinance, we've actually started to strip out a lot of the incentives that have existed in the past.
Thanks. Anyone else?
Julia's got her hand raised.
Okay,
Um,
Julia?
to take Michael's point a bit further and, you know, stop me if this is not legally defensible, but like, can we apply this framework to the entire district in any way? And, would that allow greater flexibility, across lots? And I'm sensitive to, Andy's point about different businesses coming in at different times. And I think, you know, with only a single, equation to balance of looking at the entire district at once and the proportion of these primary and secondary uses, it might be simpler to permit and review those specific cases. But, you know, I wonder if that could thread the needle of making this approach something that maintains those neighborhood uses and tries to preserve the original intents of this district. And also can make the requirements a little bit less onerous. Not sure if that's possible.
Yeah, I think the idea of looking at this at a district level would require us to do some more legal review, probably in terms of our statutory framework for zoning. One second, Eves, I'm just gonna put you on mute right now because we're hearing some background noise. In terms of, well, I should say that looking at it at the entire zoning district level, I think would require some additional legal review. The reason why I think that the approach that Michael offered may be a workable kind of middle approach to that is that we already have standards that allow for zoning to be applied across multiple lots.
So just a beauty.
Right, where typically it's not enabled for this district at this time, but through some additional changes, it could be enabled for this area. And that could allow for, as Michael had said, that kind of multi-site level planning first to be memorialized and then permitted from there. We have actually, in previous discussions about other policy approaches, we have strongly resisted the urge to make what you can do on your lot contingent on what somebody else, one of your neighbors can do on their lot. Because of the risk that and how opaque that could be in terms of what the zoning means for you individually. So
New twist on takings.
yeah, exactly. Like your neighbor already built a cafe, so you can't, kind of thing.
Right.
So we've kind of resisted taking that approach, and we haven't done a thorough legal review of the ability to do it.
And where, and sorry, I'm total homer here, but I'm still stuck, just like, can you remind me where this list came from? Presumably it's someplace else in the code, because I'm stuck on MOB, medical office.
Right,
As
so-
the dental spouse, and I'm just thinking like, because it's already there, right? Because Lakeside Pediatrics is in the innovation center, and I think I sort of conceive of that as an office use, so. Yeah, I'm just kind of stuck.
Yeah, so the use table, something in our work plan to do this year is to consolidate many of those uses. It's very specific. I think there's many types of office uses in the land use table that we would like to sort of consolidate down. So that might be some of the problem here, but we essentially went through that entire use table and assigned the category to them.
Okay.
What happened?
It's
And it
a
was
use table that's in the code.
Right, so in our code, we have a much more expansive use table, not everything is represented there. So I think Charles first started with looking at what's already permitted in the enterprise district in its entirety. We also then kind of compared that to the intent of Plan BTV and some of the discussions that we had with stakeholders early on about areas of opportunity that we saw opening up. And from there, it was sort of a judgment call, going back to that purpose statement that Charles had shared in many previous discussions about, you know, how we open up the opportunity for neighborhoods to exist here, but in support of the primary intent of this as an innovation district, as a jobs focused district. And so that's where certain things like why you see us in this table splitting hairs a bit between office in its purest form or research and development versus a medical office, for example. If there are uses that you feel particularly strong about being in one column or the other, happy to hear that feedback as well, but really that's kind of the basis for where these recommendations came from. Oh, Bruce, you're on mute.
I have, just looking at parking lots, knowing that they, just by their nature, even a small parking lot takes a lot more size than an office use or any other kind of building use. Are should parking lot be on here? Because normally that's an ancillary to a primary use.
Yeah, Bruce, we were actually talking about this today, and I think you make a good point. I think I could easily get behind removing parking garage, at least. Parking lot is something that we propose to regulate separately in the parking standards, but yes, I think parking garage specifically and potentially lot could be removed, and frankly should be.
Yeah, I just don't think the numbers will line up when you try to build it.
Yeah.
Can I, sorry, Amy's here. Not trying to be my own chair. The other one that on this use table, just for consideration, is the, this area's already had a lot of success with recreation. And I think we distinguish between health club, which to me is like your 24-hour fitness or something, and a recreational facility, which to me is like a climbing wall or a climbing gym, which the city has demand for. I think there's been an attempt, but that would be like a totally complementary use to what is going on there now and is very consistent with, with kind of the innovation economy, if you will. So I would suggest that one for consideration. I don't, since it's sort of already at your discretion to pick the column here, but
Michael, you're aware that there already is a climbing gym in the South End.
there is, and they're in desperate need of larger space, but they've struggled to find larger space.
Yeah, the couple that owns it was going to expand to the lot just south of City Market.
Yeah, I think that's stalled.
I mean, I think if the commission agrees generally with the idea that we want more flexibility for indoor health and recreation, we're happy to help provide some more nuance. If you give us high level direction, we could provide some movement for these. I think we've heard this question with light manufacturing too. The ordinance, for better or worse, right now splits a lot of hairs in terms of how these uses are considered. So, health club is in part defined by its size and a certain range of the types of activities, like a climbing wall is the example you just shared. Where a health studio could be for some of the same purposes, but just in a smaller venue. And then we also have indoor recreation facilities. And so they all overlap in a significant way with one another. And I think if the point was just that you wanted to make them consistent, we could make them consistent.
The point is more, I'm like just plain developer. And so that's where I think I'm getting into trouble. Like, you sort of think about things that I think would be complementary. And it just sort of speaks to some of the issues of trying to define things. So I'm like completely sideswiping you guys with this and I'm very apologetic, but it's such a great ordinance and I just wanted to, I just want us to finish strong. So, yeah, I don't know what flexibility we have for you all to do some work on the uses, just in terms of moving the columns, but also keep this thing moving forward.
Yeah, I think ultimately, if there are major standout individual uses that you have specific feedback on, that'd be helpful, like Bruce's comment about parking. I think the general health club point I think it's well taken. If others agree with that, we could make that switch without necessarily getting into the weeds on every use. I would say that kind of thing, like if there's some high level feedback that you could give us about how you might want this to change. I think with your support, we could make some tweaks to it and keep it moving for you on its way to the council if you want to do that.
Folks have any other specific recommendations or suggestions for changes of the use?
I agree with Megan's sentiment about a high level direction as opposed to us spending the rest of the evening combing through the use table.
Sure, I mean, we could at this point, Megan and Charles, you've gotten a lot of feedback from the commission at this point. Are you at a place where you could go through the use issues and just come back with some recommendations to finalize it at our next meeting?
Yeah, I think we can do that. I think we've got a general idea of a couple different approaches we can bring forward to provide the use table. Definitely, I would say keep in mind that the conversation we had a few months ago about the pandemic of vacant ground floor space and new development is true in Burlington as well in our region. And in the event that a development does come to fruition and it has ground floor space, can we fully expect that all of those spaces will be fully leased? I'm not sure. The Allen Brooks and Minor real estate summary of 2022 illustrated that there's actually not been much at all of brand new retail space in the area in the last year. Also keep in mind that Pine Street and some of the surrounding, the neighborhood surrounding the Innovation District currently today has a lot of successful non-residential space that is just going to be half a block away from much of the district. So I would keep that in mind. But yeah, we can bring back some proposed revisions to this. I would also say keep in mind that the allowance for parks and community gardens in that primary use table are a potential way to unlock significant amounts of that secondary table. You know, with the FAR, with the lot coverage standards, it's inevitable that there's going to be some open space in these lots, and if developers can either provide community gardens or negotiate with the city for the creation of public parks, which is not guaranteed, then that could be a way to further facilitate some of these secondary uses. But I guess that was a long answer to say yes, Andy. We can bring back some scenarios for your consideration.
I think in order to make that conversation as efficient as possible, though, I guess I'd be curious, even just as a temperature check of the commissioners that are here tonight. I heard a couple different things. One was like just kind of massaging out this table. One was Michael's take, which was keeping this here with some massaging, but applying it at a higher level rather than every single lot. And then I heard, I think maybe more Bruce and Eve's take, which is maybe we shouldn't be micromanaging uses this way at all. So I think I'd like to understand at least where the commission is right now between those three uses so that we can provide you some recommendations in your next meeting based on that.
So I am thinking that we probably have a split right now on those. I think there are some, as you said, who have the desire to really not have, focus on the uses very much, not really restrict them very much. And then there are others who are looking to keep their use restrictions in, but to broaden them out a little bit. I'll say on the one of looking at it more as a district, I think that then does touch on what all the, what your neighbors are doing. And I would, if that's the case, I'd agree with you, Megan, that that's a challenging place to go. One of the few times that we do that is when it's like the kinds of uses that you just don't want a lot of, that we might do that. But in general, we try and stay away from use, what you could do on your lot depends on what your neighbors or somebody down the street is doing on theirs. So I'd just be cautious on that one. I think it's probably more to the two different extremes. One is don't limit uses much at all. And the other is let's continue to define the uses, but maybe broaden it out a little bit over what the uses could be. And I'm not sure where we're coming down exactly as a commission on which of those two it is, but I think that's the two different thoughts that are being out there right now. Do folks want to weigh in on that and just see if we could get more of a feel of where people are on it?
I mean, completely throwing a wrench in this whole discussion. I do think it's important to mention, reiterate what Megan says, that staff obviously spent a lot of time thinking about this and did not make this decision lightly. So, and also, so I think it's important that we recognize their contributions and support them, but also, you know, with this maybe with a touch more flexibility that we've discussed, and there are helpful modifications, but staff did not make this decision lightly.
I have a comment and I agree with you. I don't know that we've ever done something like this, but perhaps we have. Is it possible to refer it up to city council, assuming there are no other controversies? Because I think it feels to me like we're going to agree that this is pretty well done. Is it possible to refer it up like this with a comment that that this was an issue for us, and inform the council of that we found that to be an issue? Because I think in the end, we may debate this for 2 or 3 more meetings and end up in the same place or very similar.
Bruce, I think that's a really great suggestion, actually, and we have done that before on places that we've been split, rather than just giving the council, here's what like a slim majority of the planning commission ended up with. There have been times where we've gone to them and said, here's what we ended up with, but on this particular issue, or that particular issue, there was a tight split, and here's what the other side had to say, something like that. So that way, because they are the ultimate decision makers in this, and so you're right, we don't need to debate this one for extended period of time when who knows how the council's ultimately going to vote on it anyhow. So what we could do is just lay it out for them, and if we're stuck on something like this, lay out the issue as you suggested. I think that's actually a great idea. Other folks?
Yeah, I agree. I'd like to do, I think we should do that. I think we should also give staff flexibility to modify as we've suggested, whether it be lot or PUD. I'm not exactly clear on the technical details, but it may be actually, move this thing forward.
So if I could make a suggestion then, Megan and Charles, if you could take this use issue, and it sounds like there's some places to tweak it a bit, to broaden it out a little bit, or to give a little bit more flexibility. But my take right now from what I'm hearing from people is we do want to keep in the specific uses as you've done, but we also want to inform the council that there's an alternative approach that could be taken on this, and just lay that out for them a little bit. So that way they can make more of an informed decision when they decide how to move forward with this. And at this point, I think this is really the primary issue that we're not, as a group, solid on and unanimous on. Am I missing anything?
Bruce, go ahead. I was just going to mention the revisions that we proposed further in this presentation that are in that second draft of the amendment. We've not yet discussed those with you. I don't think they're particularly controversial, but we've not heard your discussion.
The only thing I would amend to what Andy said is the 2 parking provisions, if we're going to submit uses, a secondary list of uses, I would like to see parking out. I don't think the calculations could work, and I think Charles might agree.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Bruce.
Okay. I think, yeah, we agree with that. And that seems like a pretty clear approach, so. I know we're getting on to 8:30. Would you like, Charles, to really quickly run through the last technical corrections that are in that proposed revision? So that way you then have gone through the complete ordinance?
Yes, that'd be great.
Okay.
All right. Okay, so the first of these is with setback, and so current, as initially proposed, the maximum front and side setback is 10 feet. We did hear from members of the public, elected officials, and stakeholders from Champlain College, just expressing a desire to increase that a little bit. You know, Nick Anderson from Champlain gave the anecdote about 194 St. Paul Street and how many of their tenants actually wish they had a little bit more space out in front for outdoor seating and that sort of thing. And that's very consistent with an urban environment that we envision in the innovation district. And so I don't see any problem in increasing the maximum setback to 20 feet. So that would essentially mean there's a range from 0 feet to 20 feet in which the building would need to be placed. I'll just move along and you can interrupt me, obviously, if you like. So with the 15,000 square foot floor plate standard, initially that would apply to parking structures as well. However, in order to facilitate shared parking structures, which is an objective of South End, the Plan BTD South End, and it's also an increasing trend in urban developments to consolidate parking and shared structures, particularly at the edge of developments. We feel like a one-time exemption per lots established as of January 1st, 2023 can exceed that 15,000 square foot maximum according to two potential scenarios. One being that if it contains a transit use, the maximum floor plate could be, and I know this is a very specific number, 60,500 square feet, or when it does not contain a transit use, maximum 30,000 square feet. The transit use structure relates specifically to a study that CCRPC did recently on the city's 68 Sears Lane property to see if it's a feasible site for the construction of a transit center with a large parking component to it. And that study produced a footprint of about 60,500 square feet. So that's where that comes from. 30,000 square feet is otherwise a sort of typical efficient floor plate, a maximally efficient floor plate for a parking structure. So this would facilitate that shared parking. It would facilitate that, you know, a very walkable interior of the district. And we think this is a reasonable revision.
Any comments on that?
I can just quickly walk through. So this
sure.
This is one of the scenarios from the CCRPC study for a transit center in red with a large parking component adjacent to it. And this parking would obviously, some of it would be fully public, some of it may be for some of the private development, some of it may be for the institutions that are currently parking on these properties. This is another scenario, but you can see that the floor plate of these is well above 15,000 square feet. So this one is about 60,500 square feet. Just a little bit about more sort of recent trends in urban development. So a couple projects from Germany, actually, I think. So you can see in orange here, these are the parking structures that they locate at the edge of these sort of major corridors. They are detached. The thinking is that in the future, as cars aren't needed as much, it's much easier to remove a standalone parking structure than it is one that's sort of got other uses in it. Again, parking structures at the edge, very large footprint parking structures. So these are typically larger than any of the residential or mixed use buildings in these districts. And so that's really the sort of concept that we're aiming for in the South End Innovation District. You recall that there initially is a sort of approach that would prescribe primary and secondary street designations to streets. And there was a map, there is a map that we propose to remove and instead allow developers to designate the frontage on their own properties with the minimum requirement that at least one block frontage has to have must be a primary frontage, and that primary frontage brings with it a greater requirement for ground floor active use or non-residential use, and the sort of the amount that that block face must be occupied by building facade. So if your block is 100 feet long, the primary frontage has to be would have to be occupied by building at least 80 feet of that. And we think this is reasonable to allow more flexibility in development without being overly prescriptive. Some of these lots are very large, most of them are very large, and a few of them will have new street networks built within them, and we don't want to be too prescriptive about these sites. We don't know fully the sort of natural characteristics of some of these sites, and I think engineers and designers need to take a look at them and make those decisions for themselves. So we propose to remove that map and with this other requirement. Parking structure ingress and egress. So we initially took some language from the downtown form code that limits parking structure facades to one ingress and egress point per facade. So one combined access point and exit point. This was another one where Nick Anderson, head planner from Champlain College, sort of raised the point that it actually may be more helpful to allow more than one opening. And so we do allow up to 2 openings with very limited dimensions that would, I think, continue to preserve the intent of creating a very walkable district, but that would otherwise create more flexibility in the development of parking structures. It's a fairly standard way to build parking structures in urban environments. And again, I think it's reasonable. Land use table consistency. This is just a very technical change. We had inadvertently used language limited in the header for the secondary column and just proposed to change that to secondary. As Megan was speaking about earlier, we proposed to newly allow planned unit developments in the South End Innovation District. The current draft that was in front of you makes no mention of PUDs, and so we do in that proposed revised draft propose to allow them. And this would really just facilitate the feasible sort of phased approach to development that these large sites require. We also propose to define floor plate as it's not defined currently in the ordinance. So that sums up the proposed revisions to the initial draft and that we recommend to you.
Okay, great, thank you. Any final questions, comments for tonight? And what we would expect is likely at our next meeting, we'd have a revised draft with recommendations, some of the final recommendations back for us that we could act on.
Or do we need it?
So in your packet, there's actually 2 drafts of the amendment. There's the first draft, and there's the second draft that has these revisions that I just presented that should be highlighted, and there should be some comments also on the right side of that document that sort of reiterate basically what I just said.
I was thinking more of the discussion that we had before on the uses, that needed some refinement, that I don't think that's reflected in the revisions that you have already.
That's correct. So I think what I kind of heard as the final take on that, and I think I'm open to correction if we misunderstood, was that there was agreement that we should take the parking uses out of the table entirely. That I think Michael had suggested giving staff some flexibility to think about how we could provide a little more flexibility within that section of the ordinance itself. And that you then wanted to communicate to council that there were different approaches you could take with regard to that specific section of the ordinance itself. But if we misunderstood that, I think, happy to bring a revised version back.
Yeah, could we empower either the chair or the executive committee to review you know, the memo or the, you know, the statement to council about the sort of one area of disagreement or whatever you would call it with regard to the use table. And would that be acceptable?
Yeah, no, Megan, I think you articulated that correctly, but this use issue is a pretty important one, and I do think it's important before we vote to refer it to the full council, that we see the final language on it. I mean, I'm not sure if people disagree with that, but I think we often try to see, especially on the important portions of these, we try to see the final language before we send it on.
I feel like my understanding is that the final language will be ironed out by city council. And, any language that we might see is articulating the possible ways to treat the issue. So it would be probably not part of the ordinance itself, but like a separate letter. Is that correct? Or memo?
Well, what we send to them is our recommendation. And when we send the recommendation, what we try to do is have the final draft of what we are recommending to them. Occasionally, when there are just minor issues, we'll let changes happen between the time that we vote on it. And it goes to council. But generally, what we try to do is have the final version of what we're recommending to the council before we send it to council.
Andy, I think what I'm hearing is that most are comfortable with the language as it sits, with a separate memo as to alternatives that might soften that section to be considered. And other than parking, I don't see any change. Are there specific changes that people want to this language?
Andy, if I might suggest that in order for us to just make sure that we're all on the same page about how you'd like us to move forward, that maybe somebody could make a motion about
Yes,
the next step.
yes, that would be great.
So I don't know, Bruce, if that was a motion, if you'd like to make what you just offered into a motion, or somebody else wants to do that.
It sounds like the chair would like to see the final language of both the memo to council as well as the potential revisions. So, and I think that's appropriate. So I guess I would make a motion that we empower staff to make changes to the use table, allowing flexibility both among the primary and secondary use categories, as well as the overall construction of where and what lots those can occur in, but also create, this is a very long motion, so it can be shortened, but also create a memo describing to council for a future recommendation the considerations of the commission as to whether the use table was needed or not.
Yes, and I think the motion should include incorporating the other changes that staff has recommended into the final version.
So using the version that is the revised version in your packet, you mean?
Yes. Because those aren't part of the public hearing version.
That's right.
So we want to have a clean final version of what we would be forwarding on to city council. So that was your motion, Michael. But I just wanted to make sure that if you're on board with it, that it's clear that the other changes should be incorporated into the
Yeah,
final.
of course. I took this for granted.
There's a
Second.
motion by Michael, second by Alex. Is there any further discussion?
I might have misheard a little bit. I'm trying to understand. Is that motion to bring this to bring the language back next time or to refer it up now?
Yeah, it would be to bring it back next time with the final version with the final set of recommendations and suggestions. And then what we would have in front of us is the final document that we could then vote on to refer to council.
Great.
Okay. Is there any further discussion? All right, seeing none, all those in favor of the motion by Michael, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
I can't see everybody, so is there anyone opposed? If you are, say, did someone say something?
I said aye.
Okay. So I don't think I heard any opposition, but I'm not certain. So I don't think I heard any. So the motion passed. So we'll get this back next time and we could take final action on it then.
Charles, can you stop screen sharing so we can see everybody? Please?
Oh, sorry, we're looking at you in large screen, so I forgot we were screen sharing.
You're like this big. There.
There you
There we
are.
go.
Now I can.
Sorry.
Good. Okay. Well, thank you. So we have the action on that one and we'll pick it up and hopefully finalize it and refer it on at our next meeting. So we'll close item 6 and on to item 7, which is the 2023 meeting schedule. I'm not sure if I saw what the changes are from what we did before.
Yeah, so this is to correct a typo. The second meeting in August was initially listed for August 28th. It should be August 22nd. So we've made that change. It's in your packet. So it's just to reapprove the schedule for this year.
Good. Thanks for doing that.
Move.
Motion by Alex, second by Julia. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion, say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you. And then item 8 is commissioner items. Any commissioner items? In our next meeting, we talked about it at the beginning. We have 2 next week, one on Tuesday and one on Thursday.
If
Any other
anyone wants to
commissioner items?
create view of City Place, you're welcome to come to my office. I'm on the 4th floor of 100 Bank Street facing east. So I have a tremendous view of everything that's going on. It's very fun. So I'll open that up to the commission and staff.
Nice, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other commissioner items? All right, seeing none, we'll close that. Then we're on to item 9, which is minutes and communications. Is there a motion to accept the minutes, accept the communications and approve the minutes?
I'll move that.
Motion by Alex, seconded by, who would like to second this one? Seconded by Julia. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye or raise your hand. Aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
We have our minutes and communications. Item 10 is adjournment. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Somebody should move. I hear a motion by Eves. Thank you, Eves. Is there a second? Seconded by Alex. All those in favor of adjournment, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
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 We stand adjourned. Thank you. We have a good meetings in front of us next week or next time.
Thank you.
Alex,
Thank you.
thanks. Take care. Good
And
night.
just as a
Thanks, guys.
reminder, we'll be here in the building in City Hall every meeting going forward. So if any of you ever want to join us here, we'll be in the new conference room on the ground floor.
And Megan, the meetings that are coming up, the joint meetings that we have, are those all have the in-person element to them as well?
So yes, those will all be hybrid. So definitely for the joint board meeting, I think if you're interested in meeting other board members on DAB, DRB, or Conservation Board, that'll actually be down at the DPW building on Pine Street. And otherwise, the meeting with the ordinance committee will be here in City Hall as well as online.
Great.
Yes, in Contoy's auditorium upstairs.
Good. Thank you. Well,
Great. Thank you all. Have a good
good night.
Thank you.
MT